Hello, and thank you for coming along. Today we're going to continue our examination of the Green Revolution. How could something so right turn out wrong? How could something so good go bad? What we'll look at today is the mythology of the Green Revolution. You'll remember some of the key characters in the unfolding debate. Norman Borlaug, 1970 Nobel Peace Laureate, who died in 2009 at the age of 95, and one of his most vocal critics, Vandana Shiva, trained initially as a nuclear scientist, but has become an ecological advocate and activist in India and indeed around the world. It's she who has raised the phrase, the mythology of the Green Revolution. Now, you'll remember we've done this as part of a series, starting off with the question, the tragic story of the modern world's love affair with the Green Revolution. This was part one of the series, and we framed some of the debate at the time. And we'll come back to some of that in future sessions, especially the statements by Sir David Attenborough. Part two of the session was the rise and forthcoming demise of petro-intensive agriculture, giving some substance to the elements of the scientific critique of the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution is often presented as the emergence of science, modern science, into pre-capitalist agriculture. But in fact, the modern science of ecology has a great deal to do with the critique, a scientific critique of the Green Revolution. Once again, led by Vandana Shiva, and a whole movement that she helped to contribute to and create, in some sense, soil, not oil. That was part two, but part three is what we're going to be looking at today, the mythology of the Green Revolution. Again, listening to what Dr. Vandana Shiva has had to say. But before we examine further the mythology of the Green Revolution, let's review what Vandana Shiva has said about the wisdom of indigenous farmers and the importance of soil, not oil. She said this in a keynote speech not too long ago, 2017, in a global meeting of the Soil Not Oil Coalition. Let's listen to what she had to say.
About 10 years ago, I wrote Soil Not Oil for two reasons. The first was all the solutions that we have on the ground were not being talked about. And secondly, the big contribution of fossil fuel agriculture to climate change was not being talked about. So for me, soil was the metaphor of a worldview based on recognition of living systems, the earth as a self-organized system. The reason James Lovelock called the earth Gaia is because his work, he worked for NASA, his work showed him that the earth regulates her own temperature. The earth regulates her climate systems. The earth has created the conditions for life to evolve. And therefore, he called her a self-organized goddess, Gaia, the Greek goddess. Just 200 years ago, humanity found ways to exploit this living Earth's systems that had been fossilized over 600 million years to create the coal and the oil and the gas that's being fracked. And every year, we've started to burn 20 million years of nature's work. And quite clearly, there's a disproportion. Because while all living systems are based on cycles, we have a hydrological cycle, the water cycle, we have a carbon cycle, we have a nitrogen cycle, the rupture of these cycles is based on burning that which should have been left underground, and at the same time pretending to ourselves that we can substitute nature's work. I'll give you a very simple example. The same factories that made the ammunitions and explosives for the war in Hitler's Germany, by fixing atmospheric nitrogen and burning fossil fuels at very high temperatures, the slogan at that time of finding out that the same ammonium nitrates could also become synthetic fertilizers, the slogan created was, "We will now create bread from air." And for every kilogram of nitrogen fertilizers, 2 liters of diesel is being used up. But every kilogram of nitrogen fertilizer is then emitting nitrous oxides that are 300 times more destabilizing for the Earth's climate systems than carbon dioxide. And it's the combination of all the ruptures of the Earth's cycles, the breaking of the planetary boundaries, and the nitrogen boundary has been broken far more deeply than even the carbon system. Part of it is going up into the atmosphere, contributing the greenhouse gas that's 300 times more deadly than carbon dioxide. Also methane. 2 big sources of methane are food waste, created by the same industrial system, as well as factory farms, created by the same industrial system. Factory farms use 100 times more inputs as energy as they give us as food. Industrial farming based on fossil fuels uses 10 times more energy than it can produce as food. It's a hugely inefficient system. Working with nature, working with the earth, working with her biodiversity, turns 1 unit of input into 10 units of food. And nourishing food at that. At this point, I think we need to look at 3 things. The first is the paradigm of industrialism, which grew from the explosion of dependence on fossil fuels. Most people forget that there was just one big player in the world a century ago, Standard Oil. And it had to be split into, I think, 26 companies. Exxon is one of them. Mobil is one of them. They're all basically new names for the old Standard Oil and its descendants. And it's not an accident that it's Rockefeller, which owns Standard Oil, which also pushed chemical farming on the third world, on countries like mine, in the name of the Green Revolution. Green Revolution was nothing more than pushing chemical fertilizers and changing plants to actually produce less biomass and more commodities. But what does the reduction of biomass mean? It means the most efficient ecological system we have in the world of taking the sun's energy, which then allows plants and algae to fix carbon dioxide, turn it into all the materials that make life possible, all the food, all the fiber, all the energy. And in one day of the sun's gifts, we could provide all of the annual needs of humanity in a renewable system. But a renewable living system, not a renewable mechanical system. So looking at the destruction that was caused to the atmosphere, which is what climate change is, but even more importantly, the destruction on the land, to cultures, to communities, because every push of fossil fuels was an uprooting of people. Everywhere in the world, it's the world's biggest displacement. And we were always put down as being undeveloped on grounds that we weren't using fossil fuels. That was our undevelopment. And development was defined as dependence on fossil fuels. And so many of the countries are still schizophrenic because they say, oh, yeah, we've got to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. And then they turn around, but you can only have development with fossil fuels. I mean, you look at the negotiations and look at the positions governments take. Why do we have a climate treaty? And why was the climate treaty dismantled? In 1992, the two big concerns that came from movements on the one hand and ecological scientists on the other was the fact that species were disappearing at a very fast rate. And the Earth Summit gave the name biodiversity to the diversity of species on this planet. That led to the Convention on Biological Diversity, which also has a protocol on biosafety, which is regulating GMOs. The second treaty was the UN Framework on Climate Change. The UN Framework on Climate Change is what was led and driven by 2,500 scientists from different fields, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And this internationally legally binding treaty was distracted in the early period by something called the Kyoto Protocol. Why was the Kyoto Protocol not a solution to climate change? Because it rewarded trade in emissions. It created something called clean development mechanism, which meant that a country that is not destroying the climate, or a sector of the economy that's not destroying the climate, could trade with the polluting industry, and the polluting industry could keep polluting.
Well, okay, you can see the critique from the soil, not oil tradition, but she goes on to make the point that we're in real trouble because of the mythology we've become enamored of in reference to the Green Revolution. It has built up a mythology around itself in such a way that we think we've created something miraculous, a breakthrough, a new form of helping human communities achieve peace. For this reason, he was given a Nobel Peace Prize, the author of the Green Revolution, Norman Borlaug. But what is the mythology of the Green Revolution and why is it so mythical? Let's have a look at what Vandana Shiva says, in fact.
My own awareness about the links of agriculture and water came with the study of the Green Revolution in 1984. I realized then that the Green Revolution, which is made to look like a miracle from miracle seeds, as they were called, and miracle chemicals, was really the result of more water being used. 10 times more water is used in the Green Revolution to produce the same amount of food as you would in ecological farming. Where does that water come from? Firstly, it comes from surface irrigation, which is dams. And so you have the Bhakra Dam, which was called the Temple of Modern India by Nehru when he was inaugurating it. That these would be the temples of modern India. But what does a dam do? It submerges large tracts of land. Now, the word for settlement in Urdu is abadi, because ab is water, Abadi is around the water, the people who settle around the water. So some of the most prosperous civilizations have been drowned to build dams. Our Tehri is one example. The Tehri was the capital of our region. It was the most important trading center for these mountain areas. It's underwater today. And an entire artificial township called New Tehri has been built, which reminds me of that very famous song, you know, houses built of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. It's absolutely like that. Houses built of ticky-tacky in a historic town, drowned. Up in above the Punjab, which was the land where the Green Revolution was introduced, on the Satluj, you see the drowning of the old town of Bilaspur. I traveled there this year in a climate pilgrimage, and the temples of this town were coming back because there was no water, there was no rain, there was a drought, and all these temples had been drowned, and the entire town. The Bhakra Dam submerged entire villages and settlements. So you destroy civilizations in the name of creating irrigation for the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution has been put on such a high level. It's become the new, it has replaced the story of Bhagirath and his penance with the mythology of the Green Revolution, because it is a mythology. It's not a science. They talk of miracle seeds, they talk of feeding India. All they did was put more water and more land under rice and wheat, and you're going to get more rice and wheat. And we've done calculations that show we'd have had exactly that much rice and wheat with organic farming if we'd had that much land and that much irrigation for the crops that were provided to Punjab. The second place where water comes is from the ground. Now, if it's surface water and you intensify the irrigation, put 10 times more, then you're putting more than the land can absorb. So what you're getting in Punjab, in the southwest areas, is waterlogging. The water is building up because you can't drain it out. You're putting so much water in, it's not getting drained out. So you've lost 10% of Punjab to a waterlogged desert, because when you have too much water, you can't grow crops. Then you've got other areas where you're drilling tube wells. And again, the World Bank used the notion of primitive. They said, if you use renewable energy to get water out of the ground, it's primitive. As a child, whenever I traveled throughout northern India, we saw Persian wheels, these amazing devices with cans, and at 10 feet they would pick up the water. The water was available at 10 feet no matter where you are. The Rajasthan desert, in Punjab, in Bihar, UP, everywhere, 10 feet of water. And Persian wheels dotting the entire land. Or you had these human-operated things like a lever, you know. A pail would go into the well, and then you'd step on the pedal, and the pail would come up, and you just put it in a little channel. That was protective irrigation. We used irrigation, but in minor quantities, not to flood our fields. The Green Revolution started this huge flooding. So when you couldn't get surface irrigation, you started to make tube wells, and the World Bank didn't just encourage tube wells, it forced tube wells. I remember in the region of Maharashtra, the government had asked me to come and see why are we constantly running out of water. We spend more and more money on providing water, for drinking water, to villages, and every year more villages are no-source villages, as they call them. So I did this study, and in the process studied all the policies, and found out in 72 they'd had a drought. And the World Bank said, no, we won't give you water for deepening your open wells from where people can manually take water out. We will only give you a loan for deep energized tube wells that run with electricity or diesel. And you will have to stop growing millets, which use 250 millimeters of water. You will have to start growing sugarcane, which uses 2,500 millimeters of water. Because sugarcane is a cash crop, which means more cash is generated, and the World Bank is always looking at how to create commercial activity to repay loans. When people have sorghum, they eat the sorghum. So living rivers don't generate returns for the World Bank, dams do. Millets don't generate returns for the World Bank, sugarcane does. And so that we've been pushed step by step into a material culture of water, excessive use of water, leading to the death of water both through dam building and mining of aquifers. But then, because you're using this excessive water for chemicals, the chemicals get dissolved in the water. Your groundwater is full of chemicals. Your rivers are now full of water. I have carried a newspaper item today on something we have known, but it's the first time the media is carrying it, of a cancer train that leaves Punjab. Every day, 50% of the people on this train are cancer victims. And they go to Rajasthan because the Jains long ago opened a cancer hospital, which is a charitable hospital where you can be treated for free. But at the end of it, the cycle leaves disease for humans. But I think the cultural shift is equally important. The cultural shift is important because when a farmer goes to a field and has to use his or her own labor to pull those 5 buckets of water out, the care they give to the farming is a different care. The care they give to the water is a conservation culture. I've just been in tribal areas in Maharashtra. Beautiful farms. The tribals carry water on their shoulders, 1 mile, and nourish each plant as if it was their own child. So you get a different kind of agriculture. When you are careless with water, as the Green Revolution made us careless, farming becomes careless. And Punjab is an example of careless farming, where pesticides now are taking a toll on people themselves. And as carelessness grows, other implications happen. When I first studied the Green Revolution, I found advertisements on female feticide. You know, come and abort your female fetus. Why have a girl? And today, we know 30 million girls haven't been allowed to be born. And most of them are in the areas where the Green Revolution kind technology has entered. Because when everything is a commodity, then nothing has value. Even human life doesn't have value.
What is the mythology then of the Green Revolution? Well, the mythology is that it was a breakthrough of science into a pre-capitalist cultures and ecologies, and it brought massive new amounts of food without any detriments. But in fact, as she has pointed out again and again, because of the violence that she describes towards cultures, the landscape itself, and individuals, we are reminded of another volume by her on the violence of the Green Revolution, which she wrote about very persuasively for the whole international community. Well, at this point, we need to think about the global shift to a sustainable system.